seen probably tripling of cybercrime, meaning, and most of that is around social media. There are legitimate concerns here that citizens face. Unfortunately, we've seen time and time again that certain legal instruments are used to control dissent by the state. So each of these institutions, their independence is questionable. Called the Online Safety Bill. This is one of many technology legislations that the government has introduced. Now here we have a bill which has now been published and gazetted, and it's causing a lot of distress and concern with civil society and citizens in a larger sense. So online safety, Lairu, is actually a concern if you look at how cybercrime, for example, has evolved since 2020. We've seen probably a tripling of cybercrime, meaning, and most of that is around social media. There are legitimate concerns here that citizens face. For example, what we call doxing. Now the bill actually talks about it, where and they give an illustration also where, let's say, you are in a relationship and the relationship ended. Most of the time, your data is then shared in a very provocative way on social media, and there is cause great distress to people, and the law enforcement is also very slow to respond to that. Cyberbullying, we see that happening online. We see people's personal information being shared online sometimes. So these are some of the things I think the bill is looking at. Also, don't forget, disinformation is a concern globally, and the bill talks about bots. So for example, if you're having election next year, that becomes very important because we see election interference happening through social media. So that's the good. I will get to the bad, which is perhaps a going concern that we always have, is that these commissions and these authorities are appointed by the executive. And of course, the people who are appointed for that, and when we try to establish these authorities, it is the executive that appoints them. There is no vetting of that. When the executive changes, those positions all change. So there's no security of tenure. There's no policy alignment. You're just going to align with the executive because that's the person who's appointed. So each of these institutions, their independence is questionable. Ideally, what we can do, and of course, certain drafting committees were of the opinion that's a little difficult because there's a constitutional amendment required. But what we can do is maybe get these appointments vetted by the Constitutional Council, because that's a good mix of the opposition minority parties, because at least there is some level of vetting for these appointments. They have wide interpretations. Unfortunately, we've seen time and time again that certain legal instruments are used to control dissent by the state. They have wide implications to many stakeholders. Internet service providers, companies like Meta, which are providing services for Sri Lankans. And don't forget, there's a lot of SMEs that rely on these platforms for their businesses. So you are essentially giving them another level of compliance, another level of regulation that they have to adhere to. Now, globally, there is a conversation. For example, even in the UK, they had an online safety bill. The consultation process took 4 years. How much a country like us can actually push an organization like Meta or any other tech companies to align to these local regulations? If you read the bill, there is a certain thing that, for example, if a person makes a false statement, you tell the internet service provider to take away his access to the internet. Now, access to the internet, Lahiru, is seen by certain quarters globally as a fundamental right. The Indian Supreme Court looks at it that way. The United Nations recognizes access to the internet as a fundamental right. And even the EU is of the same opinion. If you take away that fundamental access to the internet, you are, in essence, stifling freedom of speech. I understand certainly there is a problem with online safety. And if the government is serious to consider this a policy issue that they want to tackle, sit down with civil society, sit down with internet service providers, and even sit down with Meta. Using this as an instrument to stifle dissent, because somebody might use it. Because the way it's structured, there is always a temptation to be used that way. So genuinely there is a problem of online safety. Let's tackle it and discuss it, but wider consultation is needed, and probably this is not the way to go about it. sit down, have a consultation, have a back and forth, take the actual policy ingredients that you need and take it forward. And I think that would be the right way to go about it.